I'm Mason, 31 years old now, and working as a senior cybersecurity analyst in Boston. 3 years ago, on my birthday, my life changed forever. The people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, my parents, called me a burden and kicked me out of their house. What they didn't realize was that their comfortable lifestyle balanced on my financial support. After years of manipulation and abuse, I finally had enough. So I used my tech skills to freeze every single one of their credit cards. Where are you watching from? Hit like and subscribe to learn how quickly financial security can become an illusion when the wrong person knows your digital footprint. Growing up in suburban Connecticut, my childhood looked picture perfect from the outside. Our colonial-style house with its manicured lawn was the envy of the neighborhood. My father, Gerald, worked as an investment broker, always bragging about deals but rarely closing them. My mother, Patricia, focused entirely on maintaining appearances. From her weekly salon appointments to hosting dinner parties that strained our budget. But behind closed doors, they ruled with emotional manipulation and constant criticism. From my earliest memories, nothing I did was ever good enough. A 98% on a test would trigger questions about the missing 2%. Athletic accomplishments were dismissed as expected, while any failure became dinner conversation for weeks. Their favorite tactic was comparison. Why couldn't I be more like the Thompson boy who got a full scholarship? Or the Miller girl who was already interning at her father's law firm? Computers became my escape. At age 11, I built my first PC from parts I'd saved up for by mowing lawns. By 14, I was coding and exploring network security, finding solace in the logical world of programming where results were based on skill, not arbitrary approval. My parents initially dismissed my playing with computers as a waste of time that would never pay the bills. Their tune changed dramatically when I landed a 6-figure job right out of college. Suddenly, I was their brilliant son at social gatherings. Gerald would put his arm around me, telling everyone how he'd always encouraged my technical interests. Patricia would beam with pride as if she'd personally taught me how to code. The hypocrisy was staggering, but I was still desperate for their approval. What I didn't know then was that while I was building my career, they were building a mountain of debt. Designer clothes, luxury cars, country club memberships. Their spending had no relation to their actual income. My father's investment business had been struggling for years, with more losses than gains. They maintained their lifestyle through home equity loans and credit cards, creating a facade of wealth while sinking deeper into financial quicksand. The dynamic shifted subtly at first. Mason, can you help with the wireless network? Turned into, Mason, can you pay for a new router? Then came the bigger requests. We're a little short on the property taxes this quarter. Or, the Mercedes needs repairs, about $3,000. Each time, I told myself it was temporary. Each time, I transferred the money, hoping it would earn me the love and respect I'd been chasing since childhood. By my late 20s, I was unknowingly funding almost 40% of their expenses. My own apartment was modest while they lived in luxury. I drove a practical sedan while they maintained 2 German luxury cars. The irony wasn't lost on me that the son they'd belittled for years was now keeping their lifestyle afloat. 6 months before my fateful birthday, I started establishing boundaries. I created a separate bank account they couldn't access and began declining some of their financial requests. The response was immediate and hostile. Guilt trips became their weapon of choice. After all we've sacrificed for you, my mother would say, conveniently forgetting how they'd sacrificed nothing. This is how you repay our decades of parenting, my father would add. As if parenting deserved monetary compensation. My friend Alex was the first to call it what it was, financial abuse. We met at a cybersecurity conference and quickly bonded over our shared interests and similar family dynamics. They're using you as an ATM, not treating you like a son, he told me over beers one night. I dismissed his concerns at first, making excuses for their behavior. Deep down, though, I knew he was right. The tension escalated when I refused to pay for their anniversary trip to Bali. My mother didn't speak to me for 2 weeks, then suddenly acted as if nothing had happened when she needed money for a new patio set. My father took a different approach, showing up at my apartment unannounced to explain their temporary financial setback and how my help would be the last time they'd ask. I reluctantly gave in, hating myself for the weakness. But it bought me temporary peace. As my 30th birthday approached, I foolishly hoped for a reset in our relationship. I wanted to believe they could see me as an adult worthy of respect, not just a financial resource. I planned a small celebration at an upscale restaurant in the city, making reservations weeks in advance. Looking back, I should have seen the disaster coming. The signs were all there. I just wasn't ready to read them. My 30th birthday fell on a Friday in April. I'd reserved a private room at Bellini's, an Italian restaurant known for its excellent wine selection and intimate atmosphere. I invited only my parents and Alex, wanting a small, meaningful celebration rather than a large party. I arrived early to ensure everything was perfect, a bottle of Barolo decanting on the table, a specific table arrangement that encouraged conversation. Even a small personalized cake I'd ordered separately. The reservation was for 7 o'clock. Alex arrived precisely on time, gift in hand, a rare first edition of a cybersecurity book I'd mentioned wanting. My parents were 20 minutes late, offering no apology or explanation. My mother was wearing a new dress I'd never seen, the price tag likely astronomical, while my father sported a new watch that glinted expensively under the restaurant lights. The parking was atrocious. My mother announced as her greeting, not "Happy Birthday," or even a simple hello. My father immediately ordered a scotch, bypassing the wine I'd selected. "This place is pretentious," he muttered, loud enough for nearby servers to hear. "We could have done something at the club instead." I tried maintaining a positive atmosphere, asking about their week, complimenting my mother's dress. Alex valiantly supported my efforts, steering conversation toward neutral topics. But within 20 minutes, my parents had redirected the discussion to their recent home renovation problems and how their contractor was robbing them blind. When the appetizers arrived, I placed a small wrapped box beside my father's plate. Inside was a pair of vintage cufflinks I'd found at an antique shop. They featured a design similar to ones his father had owned, based on a story he'd told repeatedly through my childhood. He opened the box with minimal interest, gave the cufflinks a cursory glance, and said, "These look used." My mother took them from his hand, examined them, and added, "They're probably not even real silver. You can tell by the weight." She placed them back in the box without another word. Not even a perfunctory thank you. Alex caught my eye across the table, his expression conveying what words couldn't. I took a large sip of wine, telling myself to get through the evening without confrontation. It was just one dinner. I could manage a few hours. The real trouble began when the check arrived. I reached for it automatically. I had planned and invited them, after all. My father watched me review the bill and said loudly, "I hope you're not counting pennies now. Your mother and I gave you everything, and you can't even treat us to dinner without looking constipated about it." The comment stung not just for its rudeness but for its complete divorce from reality. They had given me nothing recently. It had been the other way around for years. I felt heat rising in my face but kept my voice measured. "I'm not counting pennies, Dad. I'm just checking the bill, like anyone would. Like anyone without means would," my mother corrected, her voice dripping with condescension. "If you had applied yourself more, maybe you'd be in a position where restaurant bills wouldn't require such scrutiny," Alex interjected, trying to defuse the situation. "Actually, Mason just got promoted last month. He's doing exceptionally well," my father scoffed. "Exceptionally well is relative, isn't it? Our neighbor's son just bought his parents a vacation home in Nantucket. That's exceptional." playing with computers all day is just. He waved his hand dismissively. Adequate. I couldn't hold back anymore. Those neighbors you're talking about, their son is a hedge fund manager who's currently under SEC investigation. And I don't play with computers. I protect major corporations from cybersecurity threats. My team prevented a breach last month that would have cost our client millions. And yet you live in that shoebox apartment, my mother said with a sniff. By choice, I replied. I invest my money rather than spending it on appearances. My father's face darkened. Is that a comment on our lifestyle? Because let me remind you, we raised you, clothed you, educated you. I had scholarships, I interrupted. And I've been paying back that investment tenfold for years now. The silence that followed was glacial. My father leaned forward, his voice lowered but intense. You ungrateful little shit. You think we owe you something? You're nothing but a burden. Always have been, with your weird computer obsessions and social awkwardness. We tolerate you out of parental obligation, nothing more. The restaurant seemed to freeze around us. A waiter approaching our table pivoted mid-step and retreated. Alex sat motionless, eyes wide. My mother didn't contradict my father or come to my defense. She simply examined her manicure as if bored by the conversation. I placed my credit card on the check. Signed when the waiter nervously returned, and stood up. Thank you for making this birthday memorable, I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. Alex, are you ready to go? The drive home was silent torture. My parents insisted on following me to continue our discussion, despite Alex offering to drive me. When we arrived at their house, where I'd been staying temporarily while my apartment underwent repairs after a water leak, I just wanted to retreat to the guest room and process the evening's events. Instead, I found the guest room door open, the closet empty, and my belongings packed in 2 suitcases placed neatly on the stripped bed. What is this? I asked. Though the answer was painfully obvious. My father stood in the doorway, arms crossed. We think it's time you stop taking advantage of our hospitality. You clearly have issues with how we live our lives, so you shouldn't have to suffer under our roof anymore. You're kicking me out? Tonight? It's nearly midnight, and it's my birthday. Your birthday ended at 11, my mother said from behind him, checking her watch. And we need the guest room for actual guests this weekend. The Hendersons are coming for brunch on Sunday. The surreal nature of the situation hit me like a physical blow. Where am I supposed to go? That's not our concern, my father replied. You're 30 years old. Figure it out like the independent adult you claim to be. I looked at them, really looked at them, perhaps for the first time. These people who shared my DNA were strangers to me. Cold and calculating in their cruelty. Any love I'd imagined they felt for me was a fiction I'd created to make sense of our relationship. Can I at least stay tonight and leave in the morning? I asked, hating the pleading note in my voice. No, my father said flatly. Now means now. We've indulged your entitlement long enough. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in my car with my hastily packed belongings, calling Alex to ask if I could crash on his couch. As I waited for him to answer, I watched the lights in my parents' house go out one by one, as if they were erasing any evidence of the unpleasantness, or of me. Alex's apartment was half the size of mine. But that night it felt like sanctuary. He made up the couch without question, handed me a beer, and simply said, I'm here when you want to talk about it. That was the moment I understood what real support felt like. No conditions, no guilt, just genuine concern. I barely slept, replaying the evening in my mind like a horror movie I couldn't shut off. Around 3 a.m., I opened my banking app to check something that had been nagging at me. My secondary savings account, the one I occasionally use for larger purchases, showed a balance nearly $30. 000 lower than it should have been. The transaction history revealed the truth. My parents had been making withdrawals for months. When I'd first opened that account years ago, I'd added them as authorized users in case of emergency. I'd forgotten to remove them when I started creating financial boundaries. The realization that they'd been steadily draining the account while simultaneously criticizing my financial status sent me into a spiral of rage and betrayal that made sleep impossible. Morning brought no relief. I called in sick to work, something I'd done maybe twice in my entire career, and spent the day in a haze of disbelief and mounting depression. By evening, I'd cycled through denial, anger, bargaining, and landed squarely in a darkness that scared even me. My phone showed missed calls from my office but none from my parents. They hadn't even checked to see if I had somewhere to sleep. "You need to eat something," Alex insisted, placing a plate of pasta in front of me. We were sitting at his small kitchen table. Takeout containers scattered around us. I hadn't realized until then that I hadn't eaten all day. "They'd been using me," I said, pushing the food around with my fork. "All these years. I thought if I just did enough, gave enough, they'd finally." I couldn't finish the sentence. "Love you the way you deserved?" Alex finished for me. He sat down across from me. "Mason, this isn't normal parent behavior. It's abuse, emotional and financial. The fact that you're questioning yourself shows how deeply they've manipulated you." Over the next few days, Alex helped me see the pattern that had been invisible to me while I was trapped in it. We tallied up the money they'd borrowed over the years, approaching 6 figures when we included the recent unauthorized withdrawals. We found emails where they'd made promises to repay that were never kept. Credit card statements I'd paid off for emergencies that turned out to be luxury purchases. A week after my birthday disaster, something in me shifted. The paralyzing depression gave way to cold clarity. I wasn't just hurt, I was furious. And I had skills that could channel that fury into action. "What are you thinking?" Alex asked, watching me type furiously on my laptop one evening. "I'm thinking it's time for a reality check," I replied. "They've been living in a financial fantasy world using my money as the foundation. What happens when that foundation disappears?" The plan took shape over the next few days. I struggled with the ethics. Was I becoming like them by seeking revenge? But the more I uncovered about their financial situation, the more I realized this wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. And perhaps even about forcing them to face reality before they ended up truly destitute. Using techniques I'd normally employed to strengthen corporate security, I began mapping their financial footprint. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. They were carrying over $300,000 in credit card debt spread across 12 different cards. Their mortgage was underwater after multiple refinances. My father's investment business hadn't turned a profit in nearly 3 years. They were classic examples of living well beyond their means, using credit to maintain a lifestyle they couldn't afford. Their shopping habits were particularly revealing. My mother averaged $5,000 monthly on clothing and home decor. My father spent similar amounts on electronics, golf equipment, and business dinners at expensive restaurants. Neither showed any pattern of saving or investment. It was all consumption. All funded by debt or, increasingly, by me. The technical aspects of my plan came together quickly. I could use my knowledge of credit systems to place security freezes on all their accounts simultaneously. It wouldn't be illegal. Credit freezes are a legitimate security measure, but it would immediately cut off their ability to use any of their cards or open new lines of credit. The beauty of it was that unfreezing accounts required identity verification steps that would take days, if not weeks, to navigate. I set up a secure, anonymous email account and drafted a message that would be delivered after the freezes were in place. It explained in simple terms that their financial habits were unsustainable and that this intervention was for their own good. No threats, no vindictiveness, just financial facts they needed to face. The final piece was a monitoring system that would allow me to observe the aftermath without direct contact. I created alerts for their credit inquiries, property records, and public financial filings. I wasn't hacking their accounts. I was simply watching the publicly available indicators of financial activity. On the night I planned to execute everything, I sat in Alex's living room, my finger hovering over the enter key that would set it all in motion. The ethical wrestling match in my mind reached its peak. "You don't have to do this," Alex said quietly. "Walking away completely is also an option." I thought about that, just cutting ties, focusing on rebuilding my own life. Letting them continue their spiral into eventual bankruptcy. But something in me couldn't do it. Maybe it was the last remnant of feeling responsible for them. Or maybe it was simply the human desire to see consequences for actions. "They need to understand what they've done," I said finally. "Not just to me, but to themselves. This might be the only way they'll ever face reality." I pressed enter, and within minutes, security freezes were processing on every credit account they owned. The anonymous email was scheduled to deliver the next morning. There was no going back now. I didn't sleep that night, alternating between satisfaction and doubt. Had I crossed the line? Was I becoming the monster they'd made me out to be? By morning, those questions were still unanswered, but one thing was certain: their financial house of cards was about to collapse. And I would be watching when it did. The credit freezes took effect at 8 a.m., just as the financial systems began their daily operations. I'd timed it deliberately, early enough to impact their day but late enough that customer service centers would already be swamped with calls. My anonymous email would arrive in their inboxes at 9:00 a.m., giving them time to discover the problem organically before receiving the explanation. The technical implementation had been straightforward for someone with my skills. Credit bureaus offer legitimate security freezes to protect consumers from identity theft. By accessing the three major bureaus through their security portals, I placed freezes on both my parents' profiles simultaneously. I used their personal information any concerned son might have, but routed the requests through a series of proxies that would make the origin untraceable. Everything I did was technically legal, if ethically questionable. The first sign that my plan was working came at 10:17 a.m. My phone showed 3 missed calls from my father, followed by 2 from my mother. I had silenced notifications from them but could see the calls accumulating. No voicemails. They never bothered with those, just increasingly frequent call attempts. By noon, text messages started arriving. "Mason, we're having issues with our cards. Call immediately. This is an emergency. Your mother is stranded at Nordstrom. Stop being childish and answer your phone." I forwarded the messages to Alex, who replied, "Stranded at Nordstrom?" The tragedy of it all. The email I'd scheduled delivered exactly as planned, sent through encrypted channels that would be nearly impossible to trace. It was clinical in tone, explaining that their credit had been frozen due to suspicious patterns of spending and debt accumulation. It suggested they contact each credit bureau directly and recommended financial counseling. I signed it, a concerned observer, rather than identifying myself. By mid-afternoon, their panic was evident in the communication attempts. My father's texts became threatening. "If you're behind this, there will be serious consequences." My mother tried guilt. "If you care about family at all, you'll help us fix this problem." Neither acknowledged any wrongdoing or connected the freezes to their treatment of me. In their minds, they were victims of either a banking error or a malicious attack. I monitored public records that would indicate their attempts to unfreeze the accounts. As expected, they were hitting roadblocks. Credit freezes require specific documentation and identity verification, processes designed to be thorough rather than convenient. They would need to submit forms, provide identification, and potentially wait for physical mail verification. The system that normally protected consumers was now forcing my parents to navigate bureaucratic obstacles. The first real-world impact came that evening. My monitoring alert showed an attempted charge at La Maison, their favorite overpriced French restaurant, declined at 7:23 p.m. I could picture the scene. My father's indignation, my mother's embarrassment, perhaps a hasty excuse about calling the bank. 20 minutes later, a second attempt at a different restaurant was also declined. They were trying different cards, discovering that every option was blocked. Watching from a distance created a strange emotional cocktail, satisfaction mixed with guilt, vindication tinged with shame. Was I becoming as manipulative as they were? The question haunted me. But not enough to stop what I'd set in motion. The next day brought escalation. My father attempted to access their home equity line of credit, likely as an emergency cash source. That too had been frozen. Their calls to my phone increased in frequency, with my mother finally leaving a voicemail that oscillated between anger and tearful pleading. "Whatever you think we've done, this isn't the way to handle it," she said, still not acknowledging any specific wrongdoing. By the third day, they tried a new approach, reaching out to Alex. How they got his number, I wasn't sure. But the message was clear. "Tell Mason we need to speak with him urgently about a family emergency." Alex forwarded the message with a single question mark. I assured him there was no actual emergency, just financial desperation. I continued monitoring from afar, noting their increasingly frantic attempts to restore their financial access. They contacted all 3 credit bureaus, filed complaints with their banks, even reported potential identity theft to local police. Each action was visible in the digital breadcrumbs they left behind. And each one hit the same wall: the security freezes were legitimate and properly implemented. 1 week into the freeze, they attempted a different angle. My father called my office directly. Something he'd never done before. Fortunately, I'd already explained to my supervisor that I was dealing with difficult family issues and might receive problematic calls. The message was politely taken but not passed along. Throughout this process, I maintained my distance, watching the consequences unfold without direct involvement. It wasn't about tormenting them with my presence or forcing an immediate confrontation. It was about letting reality do the work that I never could, showing them that their financial house of cards couldn't stand without my support. My anonymous observer email account received multiple replies from them, evolving from demands to fix the problem to grudging inquiries about what steps they needed to take. I didn't respond to any of these messages. The email had served its purpose as a one-way communication. The conflict between satisfaction and guilt continued to war within me. Part of me relished seeing them face consequences after years of manipulation. Another part recognized that using my technical skills as a weapon made me uncomfortably similar to them. The difference, I told myself, was that I wasn't doing this for personal gain or to maintain a false image. I was forcing a long overdue reckoning with reality. 2 weeks in, I detected the first signs that the lesson might be sinking in. My father's business website was updated to show restructuring of services, code for downsizing in the face of financial pressure. A listing appeared for one of my mother's more expensive jewelry pieces on a high-end consignment site. Small steps, but indications that they were beginning to understand their situation wasn't going to resolve itself magically. As the consequences mounted and my emotional distance increased, I began to feel less like an avenging son and more like an objective observer. The anger that had driven my initial actions was cooling into something more contemplative. I hadn't just frozen their credit, I'd frozen the dysfunctional dynamic that had defined our relationship for decades. What would thaw in its place remained to be seen. By the 3rd week, the financial dominoes began falling in earnest. My monitoring systems pinged with alerts at an increasing rate, each one revealing another consequence of their credit freeze. The first major hit came when they missed their mortgage payment. I received an alert from the county property records system showing a late notice filing. Their home, the shrine to appearances they'd prioritized over actual financial stability, was now officially in jeopardy. It wasn't in foreclosure yet, but the clock had started ticking. Their luxury car was next. My father's leased Mercedes disappeared from their driveway according to satellite imagery. A quick check of public records confirmed it had been repossessed after 2 missed payments. I imagined him trying to explain the embarrassing repo to the neighbors who had long admired his apparent success. Social consequences followed the financial ones. Their country club membership was suspended, a fact I discovered when an acquaintance who worked there mentioned it in a social media post about members who don't pay their dues. In their social circle, this was equivalent to public shaming. The carefully crafted image they'd maintained for decades was cracking visibly. Their attempts to borrow from friends hit similar walls. Through mutual connections, I heard they'd approached at least 5 different couples for temporary loans. All had declined. Some citing their own financial limitations, others more directly questioning why the Reeves were suddenly cash-strapped after years of lavish spending. The fair-weather nature of their social network became painfully apparent when financial troubles emerged. My father's business partners began distancing themselves as well. His consulting firm's website removed 2 senior partners' profiles, and a local business journal published a brief note about restructuring at the company. Without access to credit to maintain appearances, his professional facade was collapsing alongside the personal one. My mother's shopping addiction was exposed in its full extent when she tried returning recent purchases for cash refunds. Several boutiques refused, offering only store credit for items that were clearly part of a shopping compulsion rather than thoughtful purchases. One store manager, long familiar with my mother's spending habits, gently suggested speaking with a financial advisor, an embarrassment that would have been unthinkable months earlier. Throughout this cascade of consequences, their attempts to contact me continued but evolved in tone. The initial angry demands gave way to confused pleading, then to something approaching genuine desperation. "We don't understand what's happening," my mother texted. "Please, Mason, we need your help to sort this out." I maintained my distance, neither responding nor acting to either accelerate or alleviate their situation. The credit freezes had done their work. Now financial reality was the teacher they needed to face. My role was simply to observe and wait. For weeks after implementing the freezes, they reached what appeared to be their breaking point. Their electricity was temporarily shut off due to non-payment, a fact I learned when my mother called Alex in tears, asking if he knew where I was staying. "We're sitting in a dark house," she told him. "Gerald is talking about selling everything and moving to a smaller place. This isn't who we are, Alex. Please tell Mason we need to talk." Alex relayed the conversation without judgment, simply providing information and letting me decide how to respond. "They seem genuinely shaken," he noted. "Not just angry or entitled anymore, actually scared." I felt a complex mix of emotions at this news. There was undeniable satisfaction in knowing they were finally facing reality after years of financial fantasy. There was concern about their basic welfare. I hadn't intended to leave them without utilities. And there was a strange, unexpected sense of relief that perhaps the facade was finally crumbling completely, creating space for something more authentic to emerge. The ultimate domino fell when they listed their house for sale. The real estate listing appeared online, describing the property as a motivated seller opportunity, real estate code for financial distress. The asking price was well below market value, indicating they needed a quick sale rather than maximum profit. The home that had been the physical manifestation of their obsession with appearances was being sacrificed to financial necessity. This final step seemed to break something in them. After 6 weeks of credit freezes and cascading financial consequences, I received a handwritten letter delivered to my office address. Unlike their texts and calls, it contained something I'd never seen from either of them, an admission of wrongdoing. "We don't know if you're behind what's happening to us," my father wrote in his precise handwriting, "but we understand why you might be. These past weeks have forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about how we've lived and how we've treated you. We're not asking for rescue, just conversation. Whatever happens next, we need to talk, really talk, about everything." The letter wasn't a complete acknowledgement of their actions, But it was the first crack in their defensive wall I'd seen in my adult life. They were beginning to recognize that their financial problems weren't just bad luck or banking errors but the result of unsustainable choices. More importantly, they were connecting those choices to how they treated me. I showed the letter to Alex, who had become my sounding board throughout this process. "What are you thinking?" he asked after reading it. "I'm thinking it might be time to move to the next phase," I replied. "They've experienced the consequences. Now it's time to see if they've actually learned anything from them." 6 weeks and 2 days after implementing the credit freezes, I composed a text message to both of them. "I'll meet you tomorrow at 10 a.m. at Riverfront Park. Just the three of us." After a moment's hesitation, I added, "Bring financial statements for everything." Their replies came within seconds of each other. "We'll be there. Thank you, Mason. Looking forward to seeing you, son." The term of endearment, son, felt strange after everything that had transpired. Was it manipulation or the beginning of a genuine shift? Tomorrow would begin to answer that question. As I prepared for the confrontation that would either end our relationship permanently or forge something new from its ashes, I reflected on how thoroughly their lives had unraveled without access to credit. The facade had crumbled quickly once the financial foundation was removed. What remained to be seen was whether anything authentic could be built in its place. Riverfront Park offered the neutral ground I needed, public enough for safety, private enough for an honest conversation. I arrived early, securing a bench overlooking the water, rehearsing what I needed to say. This wasn't about gloating over their downfall but establishing truth as our new foundation. They arrived together, looking markedly different from the polished, confident couple I'd known all my life. My father's designer clothes had been replaced by a simple button-down shirt that looked slightly worn. My mother's hair, usually professionally colored and styled, showed gray roots and a simpler cut. The physical transformation mirrored their financial one, stripped of pretense, showing their actual reality. The awkwardness was palpable as they approached. No one seemed to know whether to hug, shake hands, or simply nod in acknowledgement. We settled on uncomfortable smiles and careful distance as they sat on the bench across from mine. "Thank you for meeting us," my father began, his voice lacking its usual authoritative tone. "We've been trying to reach you for weeks." "I know," I replied simply. "I needed space to process everything that happened." "Did you bring the financial statements I asked for?" My mother nodded, producing a worn folder from her bag. "Everything's here: bank accounts, credit cards, mortgage, investments. It's not a pretty picture." I accepted the folder but didn't open it immediately. "Before we get to that, I need to ask you something. Do you understand why I'm upset with you? Not just about being kicked out on my birthday, but about our entire relationship." They exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. My father spoke first. "We've had a lot of time to think about that, especially lately. I believe you feel we've taken advantage of your success without acknowledging how we failed to support you when you were building it. It was a start, not complete understanding, but more self-awareness than I'd ever heard from him." My mother added, "And the birthday night, that was unforgivable. We were cruel, Mason. There's no justification for how we treated you." "That night wasn't an anomaly," I said quietly. "It was just the culmination of years of emotional manipulation and financial exploitation. You've been using me as a resource, not treating me as a son." Neither denied it, which itself felt like progress. My father looked down at his hands. "When did it start? Using you financially, I mean." I'd been trying to pinpoint when we crossed that line. The question surprised me with its genuineness. It started small, asking me to cover dinner, then bills, then larger expenses. But the emotional side started much earlier. "Do you remember telling me that my computer interests would never amount to anything? Or comparing me to other kids whose paths you deemed more successful?" My mother's face showed genuine shock. "We did that. Said those things. Constantly. I confirmed. My entire childhood was measured against impossible standards. Then you took credit for my success once I achieved it despite your lack of support. The conversation continued in this vein for nearly an hour, me recounting specific instances of manipulation, them gradually moving from defensive postures to uncomfortable recognition. It wasn't a complete transformation, but the financial crisis had created cracks in their denial that allowed some truth to penetrate. Finally, I opened the folder and reviewed their financial statements. The picture was worse than even I had anticipated. Beyond the credit card debt and underwater mortgage, they had no retirement savings, no investments. Nothing but depreciating assets and mounting liabilities. You realize you're technically insolvent, I said, looking up from the papers. If you sold everything you own, you'd still be in debt. My father nodded grimly. That's become painfully clear recently. Which brings us to the credit freezes, I said, watching their reactions carefully. You know I implemented them, don't you? Their expressions confirmed they'd suspected as much, but hearing me say it directly still landed with impact. My father's face flushed with a flash of the old anger, quickly replaced by resignation. My mother simply nodded. Why? She asked. Was it revenge for kicking you out? Partly, I admitted. I was hurt and angry. But it was also the only way I could think of to make you face reality. You've been living a financial fiction for years, and I've been enabling it. That needed to stop, for all our sakes. What followed was the most honest conversation we'd ever had. I explained exactly how I'd frozen their credit, the monitoring I'd set up, and my observations of the consequences. They shared how they'd initially been furious, then desperate, and finally forced to confront their unsustainable lifestyle. We've lost almost everything, my father said. The house is under contract for a short sale. We're moving to an apartment next month. I've dissolved my partnership in the firm and taken a salaried position with a former competitor. My mother added, I've sold most of my jewelry and designer items. It's strange, but there's something freeing about it. Living without that constant pressure to maintain appearances. I laid out my conditions for moving forward. If you want me in your lives, things need to change permanently. First, professional help, both financial counseling and family therapy. Second, complete transparency about money. Third, genuine respect for boundaries, mine and yours. They agreed without hesitation, perhaps too quickly for me to fully trust their sincerity. But it was a starting point. And the credit freezes? My father asked. Will you lift them now? Not immediately, I replied. I'll help you unfreeze one card with a limited credit line. The rest will stay frozen until you've demonstrated consistent financial responsibility. Think of it as training wheels for your new financial reality. They accepted this condition with surprising grace, another indication that something fundamental had shifted. As our meeting concluded, my mother asked hesitantly, Will you come to dinner next week? At the apartment, nothing fancy, just a meal together. I considered the invitation carefully. I'll think about it. This is going to be a slow process. Trust doesn't rebuild overnight. Over the following months, they kept their word about downsizing. The house sold, and they moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment. My father adjusted to his new role as an employee rather than partner. My mother took a part-time job at a local boutique, her first paid employment in decades. They attended financial counseling weekly and family therapy with me bi-weekly. The therapy sessions were often painful but productive. A skilled therapist helped us identify unhealthy patterns that had defined our relationship for decades. My parents gradually acknowledged the emotional abuse they'd inflicted, connecting it to patterns from their own upbringings. I worked through my resentment while maintaining healthy boundaries. I provided limited financial assistance during their transition, helping with the security deposit on their apartment, for example, but always with clear terms and expectations. No more blank checks or guilt-induced transfers. When I eventually unfroze their main credit card, I helped them set up automatic payments, and spending alerts to prevent backsliding. 6 months after our confrontation in the park, we had established a new normal. Our relationship wasn't perfect. Decades of dysfunction couldn't be erased in half a year, but it was more honest than it had ever been. They lived within their means for the first time in their adult lives. I maintained my boundaries while allowing myself to cautiously hope for continued improvement. The journey from revenge to reconciliation hadn't followed the path I'd imagined. The credit freezes had been implemented in anger, but they'd ultimately served as the catalyst for necessary change. Sometimes, it seemed, the most painful interventions created the possibility for genuine healing. 3 years have passed since that fateful birthday when my world imploded and subsequently rebuilt itself in a healthier form. The journey from that night to where we are now wasn't linear. Healing rarely is. But looking back, I can trace the path that led us all to a better place. After the initial confrontation and their financial rock bottom, my parents committed to the change process with unexpected dedication. The financial counseling helped them develop a sustainable budget for the first time in their lives. They learned to distinguish between needs and wants, to save before spending, and to find value in experiences rather than possessions. The family therapy proved even more transformative. Our therapist, Dr. Levine, specialized in generational trauma and helped my parents connect their treatment of me to how they'd been raised. My father's obsession with appearances stemmed from his own father's constant criticism and status anxiety. My mother's materialism was rooted in childhood poverty and subsequent determination to never appear less than again. Understanding these patterns didn't excuse their behavior but provided context that helped us all move forward. I helped them establish financial independence appropriate to their actual income. We set up automatic savings transfers, created an emergency fund, and developed a debt repayment plan that would eventually bring them to solvency. My father, humbled by his financial collapse, proved surprisingly adaptable to his new role as an employee rather than struggling entrepreneur. My mother discovered genuine satisfaction in her retail job, especially when she was promoted to assistant manager after her first year. The boundaries I established remained firm. I never resumed my role as their financial safety net, though I did contribute to specific goals we agreed upon together, like a portion of their debt repayment that matched what they paid themselves. When they demonstrated consistent responsibility, I gradually unfroze their credit accounts, though they now used credit sparingly and strategically rather than compulsively. Our relationship today exists within a framework of mutual respect that would have been unimaginable before. We speak weekly, not from obligation but genuine interest in each other's lives. My father asks thoughtful questions about my work, having taken time to understand what cybersecurity actually entails. My mother shares insights from books she's reading rather than updates on neighbors' possessions or social status. My own healing journey required confronting uncomfortable truths about myself as well. The revenge I'd taken, while effective, revealed a capacity for calculation and emotional detachment that unsettled me. I had to acknowledge that I'd chosen to use my technical skills as a weapon, crossing ethical lines I'd previously considered absolute. This recognition led me to establish stronger personal ethical boundaries in my professional work, becoming an advocate for responsible security practices within my industry. The supportive community I built around myself has been crucial to my healing. Alex remains my closest friend, having witnessed the entire transformation. I've also formed meaningful connections with colleagues who share my values and a volunteer group where I teach technology skills to underprivileged teens. These relationships, based on genuine mutual respect rather than obligation or utility, show me daily what healthy connections look like. Perhaps the most profound lesson from this experience has been that revenge, while temporarily satisfying, isn't the answer, but sometimes a necessary disruption can be the catalyst for genuine change. My parents wouldn't have transformed without the dramatic wake-up call of financial collapse. I wouldn't have established healthy boundaries without the forced separation. The credit freezes were less about punishment and more about creating space for something new to emerge from the ashes of our dysfunctional dynamic. I've learned that family relationships don't have to be all or nothing propositions. We can love family members while acknowledging their flaws and limitations. We can forgive without forgetting or enabling harmful patterns. We can rebuild connections on new foundations when the old ones prove unsustainable. 3 years ago, I couldn't have imagined sitting comfortably at my parents' modest dining table, enjoying a meal prepared within their budget, discussing our weeks with genuine interest and appropriate vulnerability. The journey to this point required pain, confrontation, and radical honesty from all of us. It required my parents to face their financial reality and emotional patterns. It required me to balance accountability with compassion, both for them and myself. My 30th birthday marked the end of one chapter in our family story and the beginning of another. The new narrative we're writing together isn't perfect or free from conflict, but it's authentic in a way our previous relationship never was. And in that authenticity, we've all found a measure of peace that no amount of material wealth or status could provide. What's your family story? Have you ever had to establish difficult boundaries with loved ones? Or witnessed how financial issues can reveal deeper relationship dynamics? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more personal journeys of growth and transformation. Remember that healing is rarely linear, but with courage and persistence, even the most damaged relationships can sometimes find a path to something healthier. Thank you for being part of this community where we can share these vulnerable truths with each other.